Hello and welcome to my humble research castle in the sky. Uh, okay, it's not really it's not really a castle, it's not really in the sky either, but in the process of trying to communicate what it's like to embrace the new methods and modes of visual communication, I thought it would be apt to model some of these types of communications and present this entourage of learning in the place where I do most of mine. And this is the office that I custom built myself. The desk that is on right here kind of does this full on arc around the room. And I'll give you like a little shot around here. So there's the mic that you're hearing me off of right now. At least I hope it's on. I'll make for a really short video if it's not. That's on. Okay, so we're good on that. So you can see the mic right there, and then you can see some over here. There's my printers and junk, and then extra computers over there that do, a bizarre quantity of things that aren't necessarily important. So, welcome to the office. I call this place the Tech, and the Tech is, it stands for the Temple Engineering Center, and not too long ago, I used to actually bring people here on their own time, and they were usually APU graduates that were looking to do something a little extra, and so I brought them over here, and then I would custom train them on specific skill sets, and not kill sets, that's different, but skill sets, and they're usually geared around production. And the production of what? Well, the production of media, the production of tools that communicate to the learning audience. And so today I'm going to talk about some of those, and we're going to talk about where we've been with the history of presentation tools and why presentation tools are so important and why we've used them so incessantly over the last bajillion years of presentation. Even they were using presentation technology when they were, drawing pictures on the side of the cave and blood or whatever ink that was that they were making buffalo pictures in. So we've required and needed the opportunity to represent ideas and concepts visually for a long time. But it's been within probably the last 30 years or so since we've really gotten into something crazy that's allowed us to really ramp up the effectiveness of doing things with visual presentation. So let me start with a little story. And in this little story is me as a fifth grade student. And I joined 4-H. I don't know if you're aware of what 4-H is or how it works, but 4-H is it's like farming club. I don't even know what the H's stand for. The 4 H's and now I'm like a little clover. I don't know. When I joined because I think I had some friends in there and there was no Boy Scouts to go hang out with. So I joined the 4-H thing. And my mom wouldn't let me raise any animals, so I had to do something else. So I did the woodworking project, and I made a napkin holder, which didn't make the fair. Sometimes they pick the great projects and they go to the fair. Mine didn't go to the fair. I didn't have the attention to sit down and the patience to sand it to where it was awesome, so mine was less than awesome. But the one that I did do pretty well in, and what this was doing in a 4-H chapter, I don't know, but was the one on public speaking. And so as a fifth grader, I went to the state championships for 4-H speech stuff and get a load of the topic. It wasn't on like farm animals or anything. It was on soccer, which is something I knew a lot about because I played soccer a lot. So I knew a lot about it. I could speak freely on it. And it was really no big deal. But see, the first time I gave this presentation, it was like the first meeting. They're like, get up and talk about something. So the kids got up and they talked about toys or vacation. So I got them and talked about how I played soccer. And they said, okay, so you're going to do it on this? I said, why not? So the first test run where I had to do my presentation, I got up and I just talked. And I was animated and talked. And I knew a lot about what I was talking about, but I just talked. The big problem when they came to evaluate what I was trying to say is that I was using a lot of jargon. I was using vocabulary that the judges didn't understand. The audience people didn't understand. I understood it because I played the game, but nobody else understood it. And what they suggested was get yourself like some poster boards. And then that way when you're done with the poster boards, you just pull them off to the side, set them to the side, and then you got pictures where you can explain what it is that you're doing. Okay, so my dad and I made posters, and there was probably 15 or so of them. And the very first one, I started the presentation with, the kickoff, initial game, and how you feel at the beginning of the game. And I tried to draw out the drama, and then I drew like the lines, like how Madden draws the lines all over the NFL thing. Well, I was drawing lines all over this thing, and I was narrating the game as they were passing around. The markers are all over the place, and when that was all done, there was a plastic layer, so you could like wipe off the plastic. But that visual gave him an idea of what the game pace was like. Maybe today we'd have used a video or something, but didn't have that back then. So did what we could. Now, after I had the visuals, I even brought in physical examples of those things, like what a size 5 ball was versus a size 3 ball was. And so I brought these examples in, and then all the pieces were together. Suddenly the audience knew exactly what I was talking about, and I started winning. And then I got bored with it because I got tired of practicing it. And so I got to the state championships, and I think I was as good as anybody in there. But I didn't come back for my critique because I'm like, screw that. There's a hayride over there. I'm going to go get on the hayride. So I didn't. My professional competitive speech career when I was in elementary school stopped when I was in 5th grade, because after that I'm like, I'm bored. Let's move on to something else. Now, after the onset of, like, say, poster boards or chalkboards were oftentimes a big thing, where we would tape things to the chalkboard. They would draw pictures on the chalkboard, and it took forever to prep that. I remember I accidentally erased a dinosaur that my 3rd grade teacher put on the board, and I guess she spent a lot of time on it because she was not happy about that at all. So then we move on to overheads, and then you had the overheads, and you had the overhead projector. Remember the overhead projector? Yeah, it looks like this, and it was great at the time because you could put things on it, you could print out stuff, or handwrite stuff, or draw pictures on it, and suddenly you could communicate the same kind of thing as a poster, but now you could recycle these things. You could erase them and do them again. So the advantage was in its prep time. And the fact that you could put on a wider variety of things and move them around quicker. They were a whole lot more portable than giant posters. So that technology took off, and it was around for a very long time. Then it got to the point where you could get the ones you could run through your printer. And then we got to color overheads, which was like, whoa, color overheads. And it was about that time that a little program came onto the scene that changed everything. And it was the biggest revolution in presentation technology the world had ever seen. Now, I'm going to give you a little presentation on this. It's I'm sure you can guess what the program is. But the program, the little history lesson, is given on another program that is designed to replace the program it's talking about. I know, it's crazy. So here, check this out. It's the history of PowerPoint.
Why is Microsoft PowerPoint so popular? And why has an alternative presentation software taken so long to gain popularity? The answer is that PowerPoint used to be the most simple presentation software, but not anymore. Years of catering to every version of Windows, every industry, and every profession have left it overloaded with features, buttons, and options. Just try creating an animated presentation. The learning curve is hideous. Microsoft PowerPoint's presentation design is clunky, templates are boring, and the presentation template market is expensive. PowerPoint does have some winning points though. The user interface is familiar, and the presentation design typically has a refreshing look and feel. The first software to break the slideshow boredom was Prezi. Prezi went all out and decided to eliminate slides altogether. From now on, there would only be one canvas with content strategically scattered across it. Instead of moving the slides, Prezi moves the camera. In 2001 to 2012, Prezi took off as the leading PowerPoint alternative. At the same time, the search term Prezi Alternative started trending on Google search after many people who have watched the presentations complained of dizziness. Even with Vertigo, Prezi still measures up with cheap premium accounts, satisfying free accounts, and refreshing looks in the presentation design. The difficult learning curve in creating an optimal presentation and no presentation animation options put Prezi back a few pegs. In 2012, Powtoon was launched with the purpose of making the option of animation simple and cheap for everyone. The site quickly gained popularity and is now the most popular choice for making animated videos. Powtoon takes a different approach than Prezi. Prezi keeps the canvas and items fixed and moves the camera. Powtoon keeps the camera steady, but instead of moving the canvas, it moves the characters and props. Powtoon is pushing hard into becoming an animated presentations maker, with new content libraries and now also working on dramatically enhancing the presentation mode. Powtoons for presentations is free. It also has a fun look and feel and happens to be easy to animate. While Powtoon is not perfect, we are proud of how quickly it has been adopted as a PowerPoint alternative and now is a Prezi alternative. Our recommendation? Give it a try today.
So there's a lot of things that aspects of the communication process that are important, obviously, to communicate visually. Otherwise, we wouldn't use this because nobody would take the time to put it together. So on the presenter's end, I would say that there's certain distinct advantages. If on the presenter's end, the quicker something is to produce that gives that communicative effect, that's going to be something that's going to be endorsed and used. Is it easy to transport? Can you move something from one place to another? And obviously, overheads were a whole lot more difficult to transport and easier to lose or damage than a computer file, which was PowerPoint's major advantage. And the fact that you could move it around. They had these animations in there that you could use to help further illustrate the points. You could use different colors, and the construction and prep time was very fast. Not to mention that the duplication speeds were even quicker. So if you wanted to print out notes, you could. If you want to make a duplication of the entire presentation, you could. And it was very quick, very, very quick. And that was a huge advantage. Now, what about the learner? You know, what has the learner got to get out of all of this? Well, if you're the learner, there are, let's put it this way, several advantages. One of those advantages, I would say, is best described by a gentleman named Dr. John Medina. And he wrote a book called Brain Rules. And in that book, it talks about optimal conditions with which the brain operates. Now, in the section where he talks about the brain and vision, he goes in and talks about and makes several key points. One of those being that 75% of all of your senses and neural processing in your brain are tied around vision. Vision, as he stated, was the most dominant perceptive source you have for information. Vision is so powerful, in fact, it has the ability to override the other senses. So you can see and taste things, and because your brain, your visual dominance will communicate and tell your brain this is not what it is, because your taste senses said one thing, but your visual cortex and processing centers are going to override it because they're just more important. The brain will give neural priority, if you will, to the visual senses because it brings in so much more information that we tend to rely on it more heavily for the information and decisions we make around us. I would also say, too, that the eyes are very, very sensitive. Emotion is very sensitive to your visual systems. And Dr. Medina talks about this as being one of the leftover attributes of the primitive man hanging around on the open Serengeti in Africa. Because back when all the planes were equal and we didn't have gunships and flying machines with guns and energy vaporizing weapons, and the playing level was even. It was Africa was the playing field. It became very important for us to be sensitive to things that moved, because things get moved could represent your imminent death. It could represent something that was going to keep you alive. It represents something that maybe could help propagate the species. So on a very reflex level, attention to moving things is part of the reason why animations and moving things are so important in presentations. This is why animations were so important in PowerPoint. And this is part of the reason why that presentation you just saw, which was done in Powtoon or ToonPow or Powder Poo Poontoon, it was so effective, because think about how often it moved and how often it changed, which kept you wondering what's going to happen next. And that dissonance, that not knowing of what's going to happen next, is another emotional cognitive reflex that keeps your attention focused on the presentation. So it brings us to, I would say, probably the part of the presentation that is the most important in terms, especially the neo-millennials and the next generation students and all that stuff. And that's the idea that Mark Prezi, who's a big video game learning advocate, said. He said that when kids are young, because of the avalanche of media that they're exposed to, they have this sort of preset in terms of information that they're accustomed to getting in a particular period of time. And in order to maintain their attention, you have to be able to provide information, or when I say information, I mean sensory input information, things changing, stuff altering directions, new stuff popping up and disappearing. It might be irrelevant to the ultimate point, but the fact that it keeps popping up and changing helps keep the attention because of the reasons I mentioned before. So here are some of the keys to visual presentation technology. One, you have to be able to bridge the verbal gaps. Everything you say is not going to be adequately translated. If I said, we're going to be playing some football today. Well, if you're in Britain, that means something completely different. So unless I show you a soccer ball and I say, we'll be playing football today, and I talk in a British accent like this, all of a sudden you're not thinking American football, you're thinking British football, the Premier League, and all that stuff. The second thing we're going to need to look at is the rapid rate of data absorption that the visual cortex offers over any other sense. The visual cortex offers the ability to soak up more information per time than any other sense you have. So making a rich example of these sources and making the visual presentation as rich as possible is key in making a good visual support tool for your presentation. And the key of keeping a modern audience's attention is that this presentation tool, whatever you're using, should not be static. This is part of the thing that killed PowerPoint, is that you couldn't animate things that easily. It was a nightmare to get all that stuff to move around, and it took forever to coordinate its movements. So there's other tools, and we're going to look at some of those tools here in just a minute. This week, week 3, we're going to be focusing on several different technologies, one of which is Prezi. And I'm going to show you Prezi. Actually, you saw earlier the presentation on Prezi and how Prezi became this next big, alternative to PowerPoint. So this is a technology that you've seen, and it did have the change of perspective. It allowed for a change in the way that the words were communicated to the audience. You could make big words, you could zoom into little words. There is a small problem, we'll call it the Dramamine factor, where people getting sick to their stomach watching these things as the camera continued to spin around as if Tony Hawk were in charge of the camera movements. So after that, we kind of peel back and look at something called Powtoon. And Powtoon also gives the animated edge, gives lots of fun things happening, and maybe, as it's developing, might be the next big alternative to PowerPoint or alternative to Prezi, which is weird as it sounds. You'd think that Prezi might hang around a little bit longer than just a few years before people are looking for an alternative already, but that's how the world moves. There's another tool called Sparkle, and there's a video here in just a second. You're going to watch examples of Sparkle and what it does. If you remember the UPS commercials they used to play during Super Bowls and during the football season, where this guy said, the Brown, UPS Brown, what can Brown do for you? And there's little squiggly marks. That presentation genre took off, and these guys developed a program that could mimic that. Not only mimic it, but mimic it to the point to where you could produce that presentation really fast. sparkol, S-P-A-R-K-O-L. I think there's a link somewhere down there on the page that we're going to be working with here for the module. Yeah, the module that we're going to be working with. And then finally, we're going to do a little piece on Google. And Google has a very watered down presentation tool. And if you want to think of Google Docs as a presentation tool as well, it could be. It lacks all those things that we were talking about, but what it does do is it provides ease of transportation. One of the factors that's a benefit to the presenter is the ability to be able to adjust it, change it, build it, and then transport it on the fly. Well, if it's built in your Gmail account, that's pretty convenient. So we've got a whole bunch of items that we're going to look at this week. We're going to ask you to look at the range of them and then pick two to build an I Understand project. And that will get you all caught up and all set up for the what presentation tools you're going to use for your final big, shibiz shebang. So if you have any other questions, awesome, great, fantastic, love it, it's great. Give it to me as soon as you can, okay? Great.